You can create and manage S3 buckets using the Amazon CLI. We've already seen how we can create an S3 bucket using the console. So to get started with the CLI, I'm going to do that here in the console itself through Cloud Shell. So I'll begin by clicking the Cloud Shell icon. Okay, once that's fired up, I'll clear the screen with the clear command, and I'm going to start with AWS help. So if I don't know what my starting point is with the command line syntax, other than reading the AWS documentation, I could also use the built-in help system. So as I go down through the help screen, I'm looking for available services where I have an alphabetized list of next-level commands, because the AWS CLI syntax, as we know, is a hierarchy. So after AWS, what would the next level command be? Well, if we're working with S3, I'm assuming we'd want to go down into the S's to look for something down there. And certainly, we've got a couple of options. We've got S3, we've got S3 API, and we also have S3 control. So I'll press Q for quit. So if I were to run AWS S3, it says that we have some high-level S3 commands. If you're looking for low-level detailed commands for the CLI, you should be looking at S3 API. Okay, well, let's take a look here. It looks like this is used for managing the content inside of an S3 bucket. CP for copy, MV for move, RM for remove. Okay, but is this what we really want? Probably not, because we want to manage the bucket itself. So Q for quit. Let's follow its advice. AWS S3 API help. Oh, right away, this looks like where we want to be, because the next level command after AWS S3 API would be create dash bucket. Okay, AWS S3 API, create dash bucket. Let's get some help there. And then we'd get the detailed syntax. We would know exactly what to do. Okay. So down in the synopsis section, create bucket, we can specify an ACL, an access control list. Okay, so as we go further down through the help, we get examples of how to create a bucket where you're specifying the bucket name with the dash bucket parameter, and then specifying the region to deploy the bucket into using the dash region parameter. Okay, well, that's enough of that. So Q for quit. Let's get to work. AWS S3 API, create dash bucket dash bucket. Now, you would have planned out the nomenclature ahead of time, and you definitely want to have a thread of consistency or a naming convention when it comes to naming all types of resources in AWS, because it doesn't take long before you'll accumulate dozens or even hundreds of EC2 instances, S3 buckets, and if they're just named randomly, depending on the whim of the cloud technician that built it at the time, it's very hard to track what each bucket is for. So I'm going to call this budgets -east -region is going to be US-east-1. Okay, well, you would think that it got created because there's no error message and it returns the location. So what I could do is open a new web browser window, sign into the console, go to S3, and check out to see if that bucket actually exists. Let's search for bud, and there it is, budgets-east in the US East 1 region. So that worked. Also from the CLI, we can check that the buckets exist by using AWS S3 API list -buckets and press enter. Okay, so it's listing all of the buckets along with their names and creation dates. But if we looked at the returned output here, which is JSON by default, what we have is a collection of buckets, kind of like having an array if you're into programming. And each item has a name attribute and a creation date attribute. Of course, there's more than just that. But my point is the following. We can filter the output. Let's use the up arrow key to get back to our list bucket statement. I'm going to add space, --query, and in double quotes, I'll put in buckets because that's what it returned in the output. We know it's a collection. Open, close, square bracket, because it's an array, it's a collection. If I wanted the first item, I would say 0 within the square brackets. If I wanted the second item, I'd put a 1 between the square brackets. Just having the 2 square brackets there would be the same thing as having an asterisk wildcard within the square brackets. Now, to separate the object from an attribute, I would use a dot. So I want the name property. We know its name because we saw it in the output. So dot name, close double quote, press enter. Now all we're seeing are the names of all of the buckets. For example, there's budgets-east. So the point is that we can view or list our bucket names at the CLI. We don't have to go into the console to do that, even though we can. Now, you can also use AWS S3 to make a bucket. That command set is more often used to manage the contents, but you could do it with MB for make bucket. So the syntax would look like this: S3 : // and then you would give the name of the bucket. Now remember that bucket names need to be globally unique. Okay, looks like that bucket was created. Let's go back to the S3 console for fun and refresh. There is the bucket that I've just created, app1east-7562. So you can create an S3 bucket in that manner. Let's do another example. Back here in Cloud Shell, I'm going to go back to using AWS S3 API, create-bucket, --bucket. I'm going to call this one app2east and then I'll choose some random numbers here to make it unique. But what I'm going to do here is specify --region, and I'm going to specify something other than US East. Let's say Europe-West-1. So EU-West-1, and I'll press enter. Notice I get an error. It says that the unspecified location constraint. Okay, so we need to specify a location constraint, apparently, is incompatible for the specific region endpoint. Okay, so what this really means is that if you're going to be dealing with stuff outside of US East 1, because that's currently, of course, the region where I am connected up here, then you have to do things a little bit differently. Here's what I mean. Let me use the up arrow key to bring that command back. What I'm going to add to that syntax is --create-bucket-configuration space location constraints equals, and then the region I want to work with here is EU-West-1. Let's press enter. This time it allowed us to create that bucket in that region. If we go back into the S3 console, do a refresh, let's search up app2. Indeed, we do have that bucket in that region in Ireland. So there you have it. Some basic examples of creating buckets using the CLI.